So I am pleased, humbled, and honored to introduce our speaker to you tonight. Dr. Don Yerxa is a longtime friend and faculty member of the college. A graduate of ENC, Prof. Yerxa later earned his master's and doctorate in history at the University of Maine. Prof. Yerxa then went on to teach at ENC from 1977 to 2014, being given the title Professor of History Emeritus in 2009. Yerxa has been an ardent educator and scholar over the course of his career. Prof. Yerxa has authored, co-authored, or edited 12 books and countless articles, book chapters, and reviews, while also serving as editor for publications such as Historically Speaking and Fides and Historia. Finally, please note that following tonight's lecture, we will have a time for question and answers. And so now, please join me in welcoming ENC Professor of History Emeritus, Don Yerxa.
Thank you, Nick, for those kind words. I realize that my title may be obscure to some of you. That college near Blue Quincy Bay is obviously, for some obvious, and maybe not for all of you, a reference to our alma mater. And am I speaking too close to the microphone?
You should be good.
Am I okay? All right. Thanks, Nick, and thank you all for coming out this evening. I guarantee you'll get out of here in time for the Thursday night football game. Tell you, it's a bit unsettling for me to be here, to come back after 5 years to a school that I went to as an undergrad and that I taught at, did various and sundry assignments for 37 years. People have changed, and so have I. A decade or so, maybe 15 years ago, I could walk the sidewalks and people basically knew who I was. They may not know me personally, but I was, that guy that taught living issues and history courses. But now I'm just an old guy who, what's he doing here? Who is this guy? I'm reminded of the haunting verses, I find them haunting anyway, from Psalm 103. That the monks at Glastonbury Abbey, and I checked with Bruda Albrecht on this one, it's still the case, the monks at Glastonbury Abbey sing at their Vesper services on Saturday night. The life of mortals is like grass. They flourish like a flower of the field. The wind blows over it, and it is gone, and its place remembers it no more. You have honored me by remembering me to give this talk. But there's that sense of, you have a brief time and you do what you do and then it's over in a flash. And, I'm a guy. Which is as it should be. It's also a bit unsettling, at least for me, to be speaking on this. It's an assigned topic. It probably wouldn't have been one that I would come up with. You wouldn't have wanted to have heard that. But it's the legacy of ENC's 100 years in Quincy, Mass. And I've got to say up front, I am not a historian of ENC. The consummate historian of ENC sits before you, James Cameron, and so I will not try to fake it. I'm going to do something a little bit different. This is not a deep dive into the archives of this school, which would be hard for me to do in Venice, Florida, where I live. The short version of my talk, and I guess if you have other things to do, you can leave in a couple of minutes, is this, that the ENC legacy is unquestionably a function of its people. Obviously. To me, it's people, and particularly its alums, its faculty, and the contributions they've made over the last 100 years. We find ENC's legacy in the collection of stories, of scores, no hundreds, no thousands. Is there a registrar-type person that could give me the exact number of graduates in 100 years at this institution? It has to be in the thousands, but anyway, who have studied at this special school near Blue Quincy Bay. We've graduated hundreds, maybe thousands of teachers. I know one is here from a former student, Timothy Stiles. Business people, ministers / missionaries. The numbers of scores, probably hundreds of medical doctors, hundreds of lawyers, and university professors. this little school has produced. Obviously, I cannot tell all their stories. We don't have that much. I do have 3 hours, right? We can't do that, but rather than lump them into some sort of generic ENC experience, let me tell you by PowerPoint, let me illustrate a few people to give you a sampling of some of the things people have done that have gone to this school. A caveat, a disclaimer at the outset. This is not it's maybe not even representative. It's what comes to mind. So you will note somebody that's very stacked in terms of history and pre-law. So those are the people I tend to know. I'm sure in doing this, I've missed many, many good people. And in the Q&A, you have plenty of time to address that failing on my part. So let me just give you a name or two. It helps if you do forward. Ray Balls, Jr. Sadly, his father passed recently. Was a business math major, graduated in 1986. He went to BU Law as well as an MBA at BC, I believe. And he's a partner at King & Spalding, which is, I think, the premier law firm in Atlanta, where he is a partner there, but he's also a top-rated mergers and acquisition attorney. Yes. David Burgers, this is alphabetical, so you can see what's coming. David studied history here and was graduated in '89. He went to Yale Law. He's a partner currently at Jones Day. He was formerly the director of the Security Exchange Commission's Boston Regional Office. Okay, fine. I'm told by people who know these things that he was probably one of the top 2, 3, 4 lawyers in the city of Boston during that time. A very influential position. Dave Burgers, Ron Bradley, psychology, still some debate. I thought he was a history major. He said he was psychology. We'll let him give him to psychology. He got his PhD from the University of Maryland, associate head basketball coach at DePaul, Clemson, James Madison, assistant coach at the University of Maryland, and head coach at Radford, where he led that team to its first NCAA tourney. Krista Kasler, a psych English dual major, graduated from this place in 1999. Got a PhD at BU. She's associate professor and chair of the Department of Psychology at Franklin and Marshall College. David Cavallari, this may be a new name for some of you, was a history major, graduated in 1970. It's 83, forgive me. He retired as a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army, where he was a historian and a researcher, and he worked at the U.S. Army Combat Studies Institute at Fort Leavenworth. But what is interesting to me is he taught history at West Point. Robin Reed Clemenson. She was graduated with a degree in English in 1975, and she is a producer at CNBC, a producer and writer at CNBC. Interesting career. David Constantine, a math major, got his PhD from Michigan. He's associate professor of mathematics at Wesleyan University. Forgive the quality of the picture here. It was hard. I don't know where I got it, but it was hard to get. Probably from an ENC publication corrupted by multiple reproduction. A math and science major in ENC in 1942. A PhD in Chicago, where he worked with Enrico Fermi on the Manhattan Project and produced the first atomic bomb, and then worked for Argonne National Laboratories. Nancy Detweiler, who was graduated from Eastern Nazarene in 1963, got her doctorate in education from BU, Professor Emerita of Exercise and Sports Science. I'll just taught here for many, many years, inducted to the NAIA Hall of Fame, but look at her record as a coach. 505 versus 179. I'd say she had a pretty successful career as a volleyball coach. Ralph Earl Jr. Ralph wasn't here when I was a student, but some of you are nodding may remember. You certainly know his name if you didn't know him personally. Ralph is in the middle row. He's the one with the light colored suit, second from the left. was a founding professor of New Testament at NTS, Nazarene Theological Seminary, but served on the group that did the translation for the NIV. Hillary Getman, history major, 1992, Harvard Law, and PhD from the University of Maryland, where she's now currently teaching as an associate professor of business administration at Stonehill. Carl Garvison, I see, is here in the audience. I hope you don't mind the picture. That's my recollection of you, Carl. That is vintage Carl. He's obviously pretty excited about a faculty meeting. Carl was a physics philosophy double major in '79 and got his PhD at Rice University, and he's a professor of philosophy at Stonehill. Author, co-author, editor of 11 books, and his Saving Ryan, just picking one of his books, was one of the Washington Post best books of 2008. Eldon Hall, math major 48, PhD Harvard, was a lead design engineer for the Apollo guidance computer at MIT. Is Eldon still with us?
No, he's in Florida.
Where all the old guys go.
Thank you. Yeah. So the answer is yes. Ted Hobson, liberal arts degree in 1964, served for 30 years as a career diplomat in the Canadian Foreign Service, and one of his postings was as Canada's ambassador to Saudi Arabia. Sam John, you recall that I showed a picture of Hillary Getman. Hillary and Sam were history majors in the same year, valedictorian, salutatorian, I don't know which was which. They both went to law school. Sam is the Director of Legal Affairs and Communications for Global Entertainment Management, and is a founder of City View Artist Management. So he's in the entertainment field. Gregory Nibbler, history major, graduated in '76. He's had a bunch of different positions, but for those of us, and I know there's some of you in the audience, the one that we really highlight was the fact that he was a public relations manager at Gillette. Do you know what that meant for us who were his friends? Tickets to all kinds of sporting events. We were very upset when Greg decided to go and leave Gillette. I got a front row seat at a Celtics game because of Greg and many other things. A good man. Neil Nickel, President Emeritus of the YMCA, history major, 68. This is a new one for me in my research. Harry Palmer, that's the only picture I could find. English major, 1966. Served as president of Atco Records, a division of Atlantic Records that produced albums by the Rolling Stones, Aretha Franklin. I would never have guessed that an ENC alum did that. Interesting. Roger Parrott, a very familiar name since his father was president of this school. When I was a student in '76, psychology graduate, PhD in Maryland, and is the president of Belhaven University. John Rigdon, and Carly did check, he did graduate with a science degree, a generic kind of, it wasn't physics, but he did form or found the physics department here. He got a PhD from Johns Hopkins, was the editor of the American Journal of Physics, and director of physics programs at the American Institute of Physics. Richard Schubert, of course, we always bring him out, he's probably one of our most illustrious alums, was a history graduate from '58, Yale Law, president of the American Red Cross, president and vice president of Bethlehem, chairman of Bethlehem Steel, U.S. Deputy Secretary of Labor. You may recall that when Chuck Colson's book, Born Again, came out, he referred to a Bible group or a men's fellowship group that he joined as a newly converted Christian. Richard was part of that group. And president of the Points of Light Foundation that George Bush founded. Richard Simmons, chemistry, '77. Medical degree from Penn State. Senior Associate Dean for Medical Programs at George Washington University School of Medicine and Health Sciences. Austin Steelman, relatively recent grad, Physics and History, 2013. Harvard Law, 2016. And in a rather improbable career trajectory, he's gone to Stanford University to study American religious history. We had Lee Stetson back here, but this may surprise some of you that a history grad from 1964, Lee Stetson, is an actor and he does John Muir at Yosemite National Park and has done so for decades to hundreds of thousands of visitors. I remember when he spoke here, he also indicated that he's done cameo performances for Hawaii Five-O, things like that.
That's exciting.
Oh, I'm laughing. David Stewart, another improbable double major, history and chemistry. And he could have gone in either direction. He got a free ride at Ohio State and is now a professor, full professor of history at Hillsdale College. Jim Tabor, I think he was a debater with you, Jim. He graduated in '73 with a psychology degree. And I know AirTran does no longer exist, but he was the vice president for operations at AirTran. Pat Ward, Patricia Ward, English major, 1962. When I was a little guy, she was my pastor's daughter, H.B. Ward. A PhD in Wisconsin. She's a professor emerita of French and comparative literature at Vanderbilt. She had a dean's position as well at Wheaton, the one in Illinois. I don't have a picture of Charles, a.k.a. Chucky Ward, but he was her younger brother, graduated in '66. I'm not sure what his major was, but he was the chief music critic and just recently retired from the Houston Chronicle. Stephen Wilson, a general science 1991 graduate,
You skipped me.
and got his medical degree from Pittsburgh, University of Pittsburgh. He's the vice chair, Department of Family Medicine at the University of Pittsburgh. Interesting thing, there were 3 Wilson students here. Did they overlap? Were they all together once? I think maybe Stephen left by the time Allison was here. His younger brother, Paul, got an engineering physics degree in '94. He's a software engineer, manager at Lockheed Martin. Allison Wilson went to Yale Law School and was practicing law last time I knew in the Washington, D.C. area. Mike Woodruff was here for 2 years, and then he got a law degree from UCLA, partner in several firms. And one thing was very interesting for me. We got to know him, and he had some of our students go down, and we got to go to the Supreme Court twice, because he's a member of the Supreme Court Bar. But he was the acting executive director of the Christian Legal Society. And although his more famous brother is here in the audience, Stephen Yerden. Stephen? Yeah. Larry Yerden, history major, 1970, president and CEO of Strawberry Bank, and I didn't misspell it, museum in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. He also served prior to that as president of the Hancock Shaker Village in Pittsfield, and since this is Quincy's 100 years in Quincy, was the director of the Quincy Historical Society. Since I should talk a little bit more about Quincy than I have, we could not ever forget Esther Sanger, who was called the Mother Teresa of the South Shore. She was the founder of the Quincy Crisis Center and the Mary and Martha Learning Institute or Center in Hingham. And you know the next slide, right? Who is it? Yeah, right now. Jim Sheets, who was mayor of this town, this city, from 1990 to 2002. So I ask you, again, forgive me, I know I've forgotten many people who have done wonderful things. It's not meant to be an exhaustive list by any means, but it's just an example of some of the things that people have done from this little school, after going to this little school. And I ask you, rhetorically, I suppose in Q&A it could be more than rhetorical, how does a little school like ENC, with chronically modest resources, forgive me, President, but less than spectacular facilities throughout most of that 100 years. I can think of my freshman year, some of the facilities here were very modest, and some funky rules. How could they churn out such wonderfully successful people? Let me offer some thoughts. You can quibble with me, debate, or chat with me about it afterwards. I think it's a combination of several things. Size, and size cuts both ways. If you stress the advantages of a small school, you sort of don't mention the fact that we don't have a Division I football program or something like that. There are certain things you can't do because of size. But what it does, what ENC's size has enabled it to do is to have incredibly important and productive relationships between faculty members and students. Just an example, I had European history 2 semesters with Dr. Cameron back in 70, 71, or maybe 69, 70, something like that. And we would have, in those days, we had a different schedule. It was Monday, Friday, and Tuesday, Thursday, or was it Monday, Thursday? Anyway, we'd have Wednesday, which would be, every class would meet Wednesday for a half of a period. And in that half period, Jim Cameron would scare the daylights out of me because he'd have these European problems. I didn't know, I didn't have any clue what was going on. And I just sort of wanted to just get through without being terribly embarrassed. In that course, and that was when we had a pretty flush program, we may have had 20 students. European history today, Nick, 10, something like that. At UMaine, when I was a TA there for a year, we had 800 students in the European history course. There's some things that you just can't get to know students in that kind of thing. You break down into small groups with a graduate student like myself leading one. Students would ask me for recommendations, and I would give them such wonderfully detailed recommendations, like, to the best of my knowledge, I know of no reason why X would not succeed well. I mean, that really is helpful. At large universities, I got to be careful. I'm overgeneralizing, I know, but at large universities, there's a fair amount of career orientation in the faculty. Oftentimes, teaching undergraduates is a chore, something they have to do. Their rewards of promotion and tenure come from outside of the classroom in many cases. I can say with pride that ENC's faculty have never been populated by soulless careerists. ENC faculty, I can't think of an exception, maybe one, out of hundreds of faculty members in my time, showed tremendous care about their students' academic lives, but also their private and personal lives in appropriate ways. Classes were and probably still are too small to escape professors' attention, though I tried. To some degree of success, 1 year, that lasts for long. And again, I'm sorry for not sorry, but I'm continuing to reference Jim Cameron because he was my major professor. But Jim Cameron taught me how to write, and he did so because he bled red ink on my papers. Something you can't do when you have huge classes, or if you do, it's very cursory. You know, put a check here and there and say whatever. Size, location. ENC combines the benefits of a small residential school in the shadows of one of the greatest college towns in the world. Boston, as we all know, has unparalleled educational, cultural, entertainment, culinary, and employment opportunities for ENC students. There were some, I think in the older days, that used to refer to ENC as a little Harvard. And while that undoubtedly is an exaggeration, the influence of Harvard and MIT and BU and other schools on this college has been considerable. I could say a lot more about location, maybe I will a bit later, if time permits. Thirdly, size, location, it's liberal arts educational philosophy. There was a remarkable agreement about the value of a traditional liberal arts education for most of those 100 years, especially the 50 or so years that I was either a student, pardon me, I'll choke up about that, excuse me, or on the faculty. I'm still 50 years, come on.
Yeah.
Just seems like yesterday. We felt that a liberal arts education, a true education, I guess I'm loading it that way, should expose students to the history, art, literature, music, philosophy, and scientific achievements of Western civilization. I know that may strike some of you as myopically Eurocentric, but understanding the West provided a solid basis for appreciating the rest, and I use the term rest non-dismissively. We were invited to join a great conversation of thinkers, writers, and artists reaching back into antiquity. We recognize that there were, in the past, remarkable and vile people. Tragic but epoch-making events. Ennobling and destructive ideas that help to shape our world. We learn, for instance, how science provides a critically important way to understand nature or creation, but at the same time, we know that science couldn't explain everything, and it could not satisfy the human desire for meaning. We came to be comfortable with the degree of ambiguity and paradox because we understood that the human mind has limits to what it can understand. And that at the heart of reality there lies an ineffable mystery. Consequently, the God option was anything but intellectually vacuous. We were challenged to interrogate culture, high, middle-brow, and low-brow or popular culture from the perspective of historic Christian faith. We learned that to be educated is a lifetime proposition and is by no means accomplished by a 4-year pre-professional degree. We knew that we were not just training for a career, we were embarking on a lifetime journey of discovery. We appreciate, I think, most of us, that's something about the liberal arts education that has recently been emphasized in David Epstein's new book, Range, which your president has on his bookshelf. Why generalists triumph in a specialized world. Now that's probably a hyperbolic subtitle. They don't always triumph, but it's the argument is that in the most rewarding domains of life, generalists are better positioned than specialists to excel. Excellence and well-roundedness are highly compatible. Indeed, breadth and depth are allies. Liberal arts philosophy, and lastly, its Christian orientation. Size, location, educational philosophy or approach, and Christian orientation. Some approaches to higher education cynically deny the possibility of meaning. Many professors in the humanities have all but ruined the study of literature, philosophy, and history with their fixation on arcane theory and the shallow denigration of the good, the true, and the beautiful. The antidote to this soulless view of life was provided by a vibrant embrace here at this school of Orthodox Christian thinking and values. I teach Sunday school, so I'm going to say this. It wasn't Sunday school approach to Christian faith. It was an approach that welcomed questionings and probing and that sort of thing. But we stood for the integration of faith. I know that's a cliche, but I'm sure you've seen that. Let's put it this way: I'm sure you've seen that small monument outside the between Monroe and the ad building. Whoa. There we go. I'd go back to those in that. By Dean Bertha Monroe, there is no conflict between the best in education and the best in our Christian faith. Part of me wanted to debate her on that in this lecture. I'm not sure that's true. But you put quibbling words like best and you can get away with it. There's certainly a whole lot of tension. We should not deny the fact that there's tension between Christian faith and higher education. But we lived in that tension, and we grew in that tension. And that was the beauty of ENC. Now let me go back to Jim's sheets. The gospel of Jesus Christ is powerful. It's life-giving. It demands both our hearts and our minds. It is both wondrous and terrifyingly sublime. It opens us up to the vastness and inscrutable mysteries of God's grace and mercy. At ENC, then, we were challenged, and I trust still are, challenged to succeed. But the Christian understanding of success is not a function of the stuff I've been showing you today. It's not about accomplishment, as nice as that is. It's about the grace of God and the transformative power of the Holy Spirit that makes us people of character. Let me repeat, success in the Christian faith is not a function of accomplishment. It's about faith in Christ, which produces, among other things, character. Let me give you one example, and you've already seen it because Mark Mann, his father, is in the audience today. Mark Mann was a history English double major, graduated in 1990, and got his PhD from VU. He's now a professor of theology, director of the Honor Scholar program at Point Loma Nazarene University. Some of you know that Mark Mann gave his kidney to a former ENC basketball player and teammate, Rodney Thomas. Rodney unfortunately died on July 1, 2014. But he got several, I don't know how many years, it was a decade, maybe more, of life because of Mark's sacrificial gift of his kidney. That's character. Let me just show you, this is Mike Petroselli. Rodney Thomas's roommate, played basketball at ENC before he unfortunately transferred to some school up on the North Shore that's a Christian school. Gordon? I have never been prouder, more proud of ENC than on that day in Cape Cod when Mark Mann and Mike Petroselli, who I never thought of as an eloquent spokesperson at all, gave their tributes to Rodney Thomas. It was moving. It still is moving. When I think about the impact this school had on those lives, including Rodney, I am so grateful and so darn proud of those guys, all three of them. While I'm at it, two of our friends, some of our friends recently passed, Frank Garland and Steve Wheeler, 1973 grads. They didn't make my list of superstars and all that. These were wonderful human beings, tremendous human beings who are deeply missed. Steve Wheeler, in his college days, was the consummate character, right up there with Jeff Davidson, perhaps, as a character of ENC. He did I think his senior project was on Mark Twain, if I'm not mistaken. These are great guys, and these are just, I mean, if someone else were asked to do this lecture, other people's names would immediately come to mind. But I just want to signal that it's not just about accomplishments and degrees, it's also about character and what kind of people that we produce. And we should take extreme care and take pride, justifiable pride, in producing these kinds of men and women. So, Carl, I'm going to take a page from Alistair McGrath. So what I would like to say to you tonight is this. Students, there are a couple of you here, I guess, make the most of these college years. Study hard, read them books. Read good books. Have you ever considered that reading good books may be one of the most intimate human actions? I'm referring to a famous essay by Harold Brodkey, the literary critic. Why, you say? I can think of intimate actions that might, I'm reading a book, come on. Because of the prolonged and intense exposure of one mind to another. Reading can lead to life-changing alterations of your sensibilities. A good book can become the premise of your life from the point of reading thereon. Students make lasting friendships. Fellow students, but also writers and artists. The people you can journey through the rest of your life with. At ENC, I met two guys that are sitting in this audience, several of them. I met Steve Yerden, Matt Carpenter, Steve Schaff, Steve Wheeler, Frank Garland, Sean Coleman, Lois Hassinger, my wife, of 49 years. But I also met Henry Nouwen, Brendan Manning, C.S. Lewis, N.T. Wright, J.S. Bach, Giovanni Palestrina. You get what I'm saying? You're bringing with in your mind and in your understanding great artists, great musicians, great writers, and they go with you through life. They help shape your outlook on life. So students, take advantage of that. Take advantage of Boston, students. I think I have time to do this. Very good. That's the kind of thing we look forward to. I think they're done. Take advantage of Boston. I'll never forget. I know what I'm going to say. I'll never forget my experience as a skinny, young, nerdy kid from South Portland, Maine, who came here in 1968. I was all those things, but I was also a little cocky, thought I was a hotshot intellectually, whatever, which I soon realized I had a lot to learn, awful lot to learn. But Boston in the late 60s, my word. Harvard Square, the bookshops, the record stores, the freaks, the long hairs, the demonstrations, all that kind of stuff. We don't get that in South Portland, Maine. What is this going on here? The concerts at the Cambridge Common, the rock concerts. The education one would get by taking Mass Ave to go to a Red Sox game. It was a true education. Some of you know what I'm talking about. Also, the excitement of going to Jack and Marion's with huge menus in Brookline. The Mug and Muffin, which is where Newcomb Farms is now, which ENC students would go to all the time and had coffee and a muffin or whatever. Ken's in Copley Square. These are things. And then, for me, the sheer excitement, and I'm not joking, of going to the Bates Reading Library at BPL, Boston Public Library, with its magnificent edifice, going up the marble staircase, the lions. I'm going to do great things. I'm here at BPL. And because of our good history faculty at the time requiring term papers for every junior and senior level course, and took a bunch of them, I was at BPL a lot. Boston has so much to offer. Make sure you take advantage of it. I'm still talking to students, if you're still with me. Appreciate the eternal significance of your life, even life's mundane spaces. Find grace in the ordinary and the routine. Recognize that life presents us with moments of opportunity where we can grow as persons, as Christians. It may be a passage from Scripture, a good book, a magnificent sunrise. You've taken a few, seen them. Sunset, sunrise, I believe. A smile from a child, a stirring piece of music, whatever. Embrace those moments, students, anyone here. Don't sleep through them. And hold on to the truth that your time is in God's hands, again referring to the anthem that the a cappella choir sings at all major events. So students, these are some ways that you too can contribute to the, positively to the ENC legacy. Alums, and there are many of you here, press on. Continue to live lives of integrity, character, and faith. And faculty and administrators, bear with me here. Don't be discouraged. God has a habit of doing mighty things with limited human resources. His people must be faithful to his calling. Move as soon as you can beyond a focus on mere survival. Wait upon the Lord, as I know you are, for direction, and as you work on your centennial strategic plan, be sure to articulate a clear and compelling vision for this beloved college near Blue Quincy Bay. Remember, enrollment and funding follow vision, not the other way around. Well, that's all I have prepared. I can do some more, but I just want to say I thank God for ENC. It has made all the difference. I remember leaving here, and because of the I had a 3.3 QPA, which doesn't sound terribly exciting these days. And I try to say that was before grade inflation, but I scored pretty high on my GREs and got, through Dr. Cameron's auspices, I got a free ride at UMaine. And I remember my first semester, can I cut it? These guys all went to big schools, they had a bunch of courses that I never had. But you know what, they couldn't write, and they didn't know how to research. Later I found out that, and I say this only because to give tribute to Dr. Cameron and Bachman and others here, when I left when I left UMaine, I was told that I was their best graduate student in history. So it was ENC that made a tremendous impact on my life here. My mother went here. So if we're talking about legacy, that's a legacy, right? If your parents go to a school, you're now a legacy. And so my mother went here in the early 40s. She babysat for Ed and Cora Mann's, your brother, Ed Merritt, babysat for them a few times. And my brother went here. Again, I remember visiting my brother on motorcades. Those were things like, what's the equivalent now? Do you have that? it's motorcades is where high school students would come to the, something, except we didn't have sporting events or competitions, we just saw the school. And I remember going into the dorms and seeing all the guys, they had cologne and they wore blazers, and it was a different world. I mean, the movers and shakers in this college were quartet members. And life changed drastically in my 4 years as an undergraduate. Some of the institutions, like dressing up for meals on Sunday, we kind of ruined that, and by dressing up with really ugly ties and suits that we would buy at Goodwill. Things changed, but there was also a buzz about this place. I remember visiting my brother, and there were political campaigns going on if it was a presidential year. And I remember Merritt Nielsen, guess what party he was in, and all that. And then when I came here, this auditorium, how many times was it packed with forums that we had about the war, about various social issues? I mean, it was packed. It was a place where it was intellectually alive. And it was exciting to be here. Sure, it was there was some weird stuff, and it was sexist in the sense that men didn't have dorm hours and women did. I mean, there were some terrible things in that regard, but it was a wonderful place. And so I cherish my time I spent here. I cherish the many years I taught here, and I am grateful for this opportunity to speak to you tonight. And Nick, you want to take over? Sure.
All right, we're going to transition into the Q&A now, but if anyone needs to leave, I'll give you 30 seconds to step out. I encourage you all to stay, but all right, that's a good sign. I want to transition to Q&A now, and the only thing I ask is if you have a question, please raise your hand boldly so that Prof. Yerxa can find you, and then make sure to articulate your question so they can hear that, okay?
Expecting some of my college chums to leave now, which you grace me with your presence. If you have any questions or comments, you may have other people that you would like the audience to know that I didn't mention. Jim.
Comment. I've been here for 70 of those 100 years. And if you notice the first half, you're a history student. And he was one of the best students I ever had. But when you look at sheets, I taught reading, writing, and thinking. History was my vehicle. And I think of people like Schrader, Lowell Hall, John Rigdon, and myself. Dick Schubert, in 1958, was one of the outstanding debaters in this country. Nobody from here had been going to law school. He wanted to go to Yale. He had national reputation debater. I got someone from MIT and somebody from Dartmouth to write letters from along with me. And after he got in, we've not had a student fail to get into law school since then. And Lowell Hall did the same kind of thing. John Free did. I mean, you said, how can a kid from a little school like this get into a big university? Some of them worked pretty hard at it. And we're certainly proud of it, and I'm certainly proud of him. And the quality and scope of his lecture tonight. Thank you, Don.
You're welcome. Thank you. Kickoff is, I think, 8 o'clock, so I'm still. I see that. Steve.
Don, I want to thank you for inspiring us still. You know, even at this time in life, to be spending time with friends and reminding us of what's important in our lives. Thank you.
You're welcome. We could spend. I could have spent the entire time talking about friendships, and they are lasting. I'm looking at a bunch of you guys. It's just amazing. I've been gone for 5 years. I see some of the guys every once in a while, but we immediately reconnect. We have that shared background experience, laughs, tears. I was emailing back and forth with Randall Stevens. Some of you know Randall. He's at the University of Oslo in Norway. And he was saying, he's that he misses ENC in the sense that there was a camaraderie among the faculty when he was here that he misses and hasn't found elsewhere. I frankly think that it was on the wane when he was here, that it was stronger even before his time. But he's tapped into something that's special about ENC, the relationships that are formed that are lifelong. Nick?
So you've had a whole career in Christian higher education, and you mentioned that phrase of yours, integration of faith and learning. What do you believe really should be the next step? I mean, you interact with other faculty at other Christian institutions. What is really, where do we need to next move with the integration of faith and learning?
Who's we? Eastern Nazarene or
Let's say local, ENC, yeah.
My frame of reference is 5 years dated already, so I don't know where you are right now, but I think it's important to have a critical approach that you model responsibly with students. That, I'm not sure I'm addressing where you want to go, but let me get this out anyway. That we have a responsibility to sort of challenge, interrogate unexamined worldviews, immature worldviews about faith and understanding about nature. But we better make sure we replace it with something better and so more solid. It's very easy to tear down in a freshman level course or a sophomore level course some simplistic views of God, nature, whatever. But it's much harder, and also equally as important to build up a more responsible outlook and more thoughtful perspective on faith and learning. And that's harder, but I think the two go together. And if we ever fail in the latter course, we've done real damage to students because we've taken away their foundation and we haven't replaced it with something firmer. I don't know if you were wanting me to go more into the history and kinds of things, but one of the things that really has animated my career in the last 15 or 20 years, I edited a journal called Fides and Historia, Latin for Faith and History. And there are about 400 to 500 members, most of them evangelical Christian faculty members. And one of the things that I think is important is to stress the intentional notion of intentional Christian scholarship. Not scholarship by Christians, but intentional Christian scholarship. So scholarship that is informed by the faith. Again, not Sunday school, not forcing the issue with vapid kind of things, but it's that's an important thing that I think needs to be upheld. So for me, how as a Christian historian, these are questions that Dr. Cameron introduced to us in seminars, and Wilbur Mullen, the late Wilbur Mullen in philosophy courses. How does a Christian historian do history in any way different fashion than a secular historian? And so you say we have a perspective, and how do you do that? How do you do that responsibly? You can't just interject God like you can footnote God. How do you? But as a Christian, you believe that in providence, you believe that there's something going on here. So how do you deal with it? I think there's been a speaker here in the last 5 years, Carlos Ayer from Yale, who's modeling some of that stuff. Those questions I find incredibly fascinating. I don't think that, for instance, my field, and you can try to project that into some of your own fields, I don't think the field of history is exhausted by what academic historians produce. The past is a much richer and fuller place than the kind of histories we crank out in university presses. It's a place where people actually believed in stuff, they actually lived and died. It's far richer than the arcane theory-driven writing of many professions. I'm sorry. Get me on the soapbox. I see that hand, sir.
Matt Carper, class of 75.
Were you happen to be a Kappa Cougar?
I was just going to thank you for recruiting me to Kappa. That was when you were known as Sir John of Yerxa. I also did, one of the things you contributed to my education was a fine solid rock and roll background with the WBCN and Lou Reed and several others along the way. But you and your friend used to tell us about things that happened before we arrived at school, with all the Vietnam area stuff and the assassination of Martin Luther King. I believe you were around the school at that time. What was that like, and how was that different from the way things are now?
Well, there was a lot going on, obviously. The Vietnam War kind of shaped the whole experience. A lot of people were here, students were here. I think our enrollment crested those years, and for wonder why. You know, you had a deferment from going into the military, a student deferment. So I mean, one of my vivid memories as an undergrad is the day that they had the lottery drawings for your draft boards to see what number you got. And some guys just got devastated because as soon as you left the school, if you dropped out or graduated, you were going to get drafted. So that shaped our entire time here at ENC. Some of us remember, was it Noel Fitch and some others speaking on the steps of the ad building, and Ralph Johansson with the drum pounding the number of people that died. You know, it was a real thing. So, but ENC is an interesting place because also what was very real. Well, this is being taped. Let me say that. Let me end with that. There were issues with the town and gown, issues that were interesting in those days as well. I see. Yes.
I have like 2 questions.
You do? Okay.
I was wondering, when you were in ENC, were there a lot of international students?
I know, I heard, yeah. It's still a little bit, I can still hear a little. There were some, you know, what's a lot? I don't, you know. There,
Okay.
what, would we have had 5%? I don't know, is that generous? Yes.
I know that I was part of the international students group, and that was for me, so.
I remember my room, we're both from Maine, the great state of Maine. And I remember my roommate who was from the big city. You know what that is? Manchester, Connecticut. It wasn't you, Steve. And he would just say, "Do you have flush toilets now in Maine or something?" Yeah, I'm sorry, the serious answer is there were some, but I don't think it was a huge number.
I have another question.
Sure.
Do you have anything that you kind of are looking forward to, like college freshmen and like students here accomplish in the future?
Help me out. It's something that I'm looking for?
Yeah, like, are you looking forward to, do you have any, let's see, like any, yeah, like anything you're
Advice?
excited for us to accomplish in the future?
I'm sure, I'm so, I can help
Is
someone.
there anything you're excited for freshmen to accomplish now?
Like, what would you like to see us do
Yeah.
in the future?
Oh, okay, thank you. I'm sorry, it's just I'm being dense. You know, it's gonna sound like a bunch of cliches, but I'd like to see you perform to your highest ability. I'd like for you not to have, as I had for much of my early career, a inferiority complex because I went to ENC. Guidance counselors would say, and some of you know what I'm talking about, why are you going there? Some of you are athletes, why you go there? Why, you know, why not X, Y, and Z? I remember my high school history teacher just stamping her foot, no, why are you doing that? And that sometimes we kind of think that, you know, we're just a little school. Part of my reason for showing all these slides is, yeah, we're a little school, but look at, you can do all kinds of stuff. And the sky's the limit, but you've got to apply yourself. Don't sleep through your college years. It's too expensive. Spend the money and go and travel the world instead of, you know, apply yourself. Don't feel pressured to know exactly what you're going to do with your life because you don't know what it's going to be like. Get an education. You need a credential. You need a card that gets you entrance into the game. But you also need to be able to think. I would ask you to be able to write a coherent sentence. Let's go crazy and string a couple of them together and write a paragraph. I am terribly serious. There are college and university graduates from prestigious schools that can't write. And I have found, and maybe some of you can attest to this, that pedigree means a lot in some circles, and UMaine and Eastern Nazarene, not high on the pedigree list, but I was able to perform when given the opportunity. And when you have that opportunity, you'll find that in the business world and elsewhere, it's what you do and how you perform and how well you undertake your tasks and the way you interact with your colleagues and how you network effectively that makes a big difference. I'll give you one more example. Again, this is not meant to be self-serving, but I'm trying to illustrate the point. Randall Stevens, Mid-American Nazarene University, Donald Yerxa, the Eastern Nazarene College. We both were working at the Historical Society at Boston University. And I had to explain, it's the Historical Society. It's a really presumptuous term. But it was an alternative society to the umbrella group called the American Historical Association. Our other two colleagues were, one was a Nobel laureate's son, and another was brilliant BU student, went to BU and graduate school there. All they cared about was rock concerts, those two. Randall and I were hungry. We knew we had an opportunity to interact at the highest levels of our profession, and we took advantage of it. So there's a case where pedigree was meaningless. It was what you did with the situation you found yourself, and can you perform? And so read, be able to think, be able to articulate what you're reading, and criticize it. Basic stuff. It doesn't matter what major you are in, you can apply and learn those skills. But you also need to have a major, you need to have some level of credentialing to get going anywhere.
So you talked about your time at PHX.
Yes.
How did you get there? What moments of grace or serendipity, whatever you want to call it, presented themselves to you? How did you take advantage of that? And are there any lessons that the students you have practiced?
My career trajectory is so weird, I'm not sure there's too many lessons that you could draw from my experience. What time do I have here? Ooh, I'm done, aren't I? This could take 5 minutes, okay? I didn't become a full-time history professor at ENC until 1994. I started in 1977. So I was, what's the right term? Victim of a fully tenured department. There was no openings for a person like me. So I taught history courses, individual courses, and I taught gen ed courses. But I had a 17-year period in which I never got to do what I had trained to do. In that time, I published a book, many articles. And my field vision was military history. I trained in naval history. And I remember submitting what I thought was an incredible proposal to the NEH, National Endowment for Humanities, for a grant. And it was categorically turned down. The guy sitting in the back was telling me, there's this thing called the Templeton Foundation that actually is giving money away for, and it's kind of interesting stuff. Carl Giverson got me hooked onto that. Carl and I went to Oxford for 3 summers. Prior to that, we met John Wilson, who's the editor of Books and Culture. And a variety of things, serendipitous things, occurred that through me, and Carl has a different story, but for a while there we did some similar things, into a different world. And I remember, just like my UMaine experience, I remember going to this Oxford group and I say, what in the world am I doing here? I have a naval history background. I'm here with some of the best and brightest intellectuals in the field of science and religion. I don't belong here. And then within a few weeks, I think both Carl and I understood, they're still at it, that we actually had curiosity, we had skills and interests that transcended pedigree. and we were able to take advantage of those opportunities. Okay, that's a long story. So now I'm writing for Books and Culture. And this thing called the Historical Society was formed at 2 organizational meetings at BU by a world-renowned historian of American slavery, Jean Genovese, and some others. And because I was writing for Books and Culture, John Wilson, the editor of that journal, or MAG as he calls it, asked me to comment and write about this experience. It's a new history organization that wants to upend the American Historical Association. Didn't quite do it, but I wrote that. The director of that organization read it and asked me to come in for an interview, and basically gave me a chance to edit Historically Speaking, which was a in-house rag at the time, just kind of an alumni paper, and wanted me to change it to what he called the New York Review of Books for History. And so ENC graciously at that point, I had just become, in 1994, head of the history department, and in 2001 I was asking ENC to release me from full-time teaching and to prorate my teaching so that I could take on this experience. And so that's how I got started there. And my offices were underneath the Citgo sign in Kenmore Square. And it was a great experience. As I told some people today, we published 14 Pulitzer Prize-winning historians or nonfiction writers in my time as editor there. It was a great experience. So I had to retool. I was no longer a naval historian, although I wrote occasionally. I was not really a bona fide science and religion expert, but I was on the engaged periphery of that discussion. I knew enough about it and knew that many of the players to be involved in that. And I had to reconceive myself as, and it took a little while, it's okay to be an editor of history journals. The world didn't need another monograph that I could come up with on naval history or something. It was just fine to be an editor. And I got as much satisfaction of bringing other people into print as I did my own stuff. I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah. Again, these are experiences that someone with my pedigree usually doesn't get a chance to do. So again, the ENC experience was unbelievable for me, both as a student and then collegial interactions as a faculty member. We had a group of guys, people, there were women too, professors, about 5 or 6 of us. We called ourselves the Bookers, not knowing that there was such a thing in Britain, but the Bookers, and we would read books. Lowell Hall was one of them too. We would read books on a variety of topics as faculty members, informally. We meet once every 2 or 3 weeks, and it was intellectual excitement that I found was very easy to translate into other settings.
Please join me again for 20 o'clock.